everybody. Good day?
Oh, great day. Lots of outside time, right?
Yes, lots of outside time today. So I wanted to do a video tonight because Steve shared with me a very interesting article today that he had read on NPR or something.
No, it was on Facebook.
Oh, was it? It kind of came up in your...
I don't read... Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't on NPR. I was on Facebook and I saw it kind of come up in the, like the trending thing.
Yeah.
So I kind of got a lot of news articles kind of caught my attention today.
Mm-hmm.
But it was pretty interesting. It's funny things, I read this article in Journal of American Medical Association, and I registered what it was about and said, oh, that's interesting. And then went almost all day without telling you about it. And then I was like, no, wait, that's your wheelhouse.
I know, you shared it with me, and I was like, I can't believe you didn't jump up and down and say, oh my gosh, listen to what I just read.
Right.
And so if you didn't see it yet, it's this article called Financial Ruin Can Be Hazardous to Your Health, and a study that was done on 8,000 people.
Because you can really see that.
I don't think you can see that very well.
You can almost see the picture. Hey, look, if I hang it with an angle like that, you can almost see it.
And so it's a study they did on 8,000 people, and they found a profound connection between a significant financial loss and mortality over the next 2 decades, a 50%.
Yeah.
Increase of dying in the next 2 decades if you had some type of financial disaster.
And the financial disaster was 75% or more of your wealth lost over a period of 2 years or less. So if from now and 2 years from now, if you lost 75% of your net worth or whatever, those were kind of the parameters. There was an increase of a 50% increase in, I think, all-cause mortality, which is all the different stuff, the health stuff, the suicides, all the different things. 50% increase in your chances of dying over a period of 20 years, which is a fairly kind of remarkable thing. All-cause mortality is an interesting thing. It's because they don't control for any one particular thing. They're just looking at overall, if you lose a whole bunch of money, what are the chances of you dying? You know what I'm saying? And it's interesting that it would have such a strong impact, and that impact would be sustained for such a really long period of time. Mm-hmm. And what was the phrase that they used there that was so interesting?
Negative wealth shock?
Negative wealth shock, which is interesting because in German New Medicine, obviously, there's something called a conflict shock.
Yeah, if you're unfamiliar, German New Medicine, the major premise that Dr. Hamer discovered was that all disease, every illness, every thing that we consider like a sickness, a disease, stroke, cancer, heart attack, it's caused by, initiated by some type of emotional conflict shock. It's called the DHS, which is a Dirk Hamer Syndrome, and it's called that because the way Dr. Hamer discovered all of this is that his 17-year-old son was shot and killed in a very shocking, traumatic event, and a few months after the death of his son, Dr. Hamer found he had a testicular cancer, and so from there he developed, the idea came to him, and then he had the opportunity to study lots of people and found an explicit, direct connection between certain types of emotional conflict, emotional traumas, things that happen, and kind of the hallmark of the DHS is that it catches you off guard. You weren't prepared for it, you weren't expecting it, you were rendered helpless in a moment where something happened that was beyond your ability to comprehend, to take in, to adapt to in that moment. And so what happens is that triggers, when you are in the state of conflict, it triggers an ancient biological pre-programmed change of adaptation of physiological tissues. And the purpose for that, there's a biological reason for every time there's a change on the tissue level, there's a biological purpose, a biological meaning to those physical changes. And it's evolved to help you to survive whatever that situation is so that you can get to safety. Mm-hmm. And so what he found was that every single case of disease is actually the body's attempt to adapt to this emotional trauma, this shocking thing that happened. And what ends up, people end up dying from is either the healing phase, so the restoration of those tissues, the treatments that are given to the person due to the restoration of those tissues. And so this is just, it just proves very clearly that it's these emotional shocks, this trauma increases mortality by that much because this person had a negative wealth shock. And The interesting thing about it is that everything within German New Medicine, it's very unique. It's very specific to the individual having the experience.
Just real quick before we go into that, a couple things that's interesting to me is one of them, and I think you kind of made that clear, but just like the really relevant distinction here, because many people are familiar with the idea that if you experience a trauma or a stress, that it can kind of erode or wear down your physical health. You know what I'm saying? There's this Hans Selye, and there's the, what's it called specifically? The...
stress model? Something like that?
No, anyway, that's probably close enough. But anyway, the basic idea there is that allostatic load and all that stuff, that when you're under a stress, whether it's mental, whether it's emotional, whether it's a chemical stress from eating something that's, not appropriate for your biology or whatever, that the body attempts to adapt to those stressors, and that the adaptation demands resources, that the body can adapt to things that aren't really good for it, but that adaptation is costly, and that over time the ability to adapt breaks down, and when it fully breaks down or breaks down past a critical point, say 50%, when you just as a reference point, then symptoms of disease begin to show. And that's a fairly common, people kind of have an idea about it. It's been around for a long time. This, though, is a little different. This isn't saying that symptoms start to show when the body ceases to be able to adapt to the stress. This is saying that the symptoms themselves are a manifestation of the body's attempt to adapt to not the stress, but to the individual's perception and experience of those stressors. So for let's say something happens in someone's life. They discover that their longtime partner of 25 years is being unfaithful to them, or they discover that 75% of their money has suddenly gone out the window, or they discover that something shocking happens to them, and there's a moment when they discover it, and it kind of just hits them, right? That experience, like the experience of betrayal, of being shocked, of being like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Or, oh my God, I must not be good enough. Or, oh my God, my life is over. Or, oh my God, how am I going to survive? Or go on, or whatever. All of that trauma. And, if you've ever had one of these events happen, or you had a traumatic event, like if you really give yourself a second to really think about what it was like, and like in that moment in time, there was this all-encompassing kind of experience. And the key thing for me in the whole German New Medicine thing is understanding that experience constitutes a communication between the psyche and the soma, or the body, that the body is listening to that experience, and it's interpreting that experience on kind of a tissue level, on a cellular level, and it's saying, okay, given this experience that we are having, that the body is having, that the psyche is having, given that communication that the psyche is relaying to us, the tissues of the body, what the hell's going on out there, and how can we prepare ourselves to get through it, and to survive it? And that interpretation, it's like playing the telephone game, and it's like if I whisper, I don't know, a number sequence, or if I whisper a message into Melissa's ear, and then it goes around, there's like 25 people, by the time it makes it back around, it's something totally different, and a lot of it has to do with interpretation, a lot of it has to do with just, mishearing things, misunderstanding things. So I think that's one of those things to be aware of too, is that it's not that the body's response to a conflict is necessarily helpful. It's just the body's effort to interpret it and surmise, okay, based on the fact we're having this experience, what in our environment might cause us to have that kind of an experience, and what can we do as cells, as tissues, to basically increase the chances of our surviving this thing. So that's like the nuanced difference there, is that the body's attempting to respond to the environment based on what our experience of that environment is. Just beginning to think of, this is a big thing for me, beginning to think of what it's like to be you in a given moment in time. Despair, frustration, anger, shock, whatever. Beginning to think of that not only as a personal experience, but as a significant biological communication. That is something that the nervous system, right, which, your sense of self is a sort of a projection of a sense in the nervous system. At the very least, the nervous system is a conduit for your consciousness, your sense of self, that your experience of what it's like to be you is not just an experience, kind of from a humanistic perspective. It's also a biological relay of information about the outside environment being interpreted by the psyche and being basically communicated to the tissues of the body so that the tissues of the body can respond in a way that maximize the chances of your survival. And so it's a really interesting thing like this. I mean, if you read some of the explanations that they were giving for it, it's like, oh, maybe people can't afford their medications. But it's like, that's probably part of it. Or can't afford their health care or whatever. Or maybe the quality of the food that they eat goes down. But it's like 50% increase over a period of 20 years is a profound shift. Like you're 50% more likely to die if your wealth decreases by 75%. I don't think that like literal material things are really the full explanation there, which is like, I now can't afford to buy certain life-preserving things and therefore I'm dying. And it would seem as if there's something significant to the emotional experience, to the individual experience, that is having a direct and independent impact upon the person's lifespan. You know what I'm saying? It's just like there's something about... Now, the interesting thing about that, too, is it would be really interesting to see there are a lot of people out there who, if they lose 75% of their wealth... Now, see, this is the interesting thing. This is not a study of people who, if you're reduced to less than $20,000 per year, the chances of you dying increases by 50%. That might not be that surprising. Well, because you can't afford as good a quality health care, or you can't afford good quality food, or you can't afford to live in a whatever, This is, if you've got $1 billion and you lose 75% of your wealth, you're still richer than the probably top 1% of the top 1%. You've still got a tremendous amount of money. And yet, your chances of dying ostensibly still increase by 50%, and it's because of the experience. You know what I'm saying? That it's not just about that physical stuff. It's like the shock itself, the emotional experience of loss of something, like that's shocking, that has an impact on basically your body and your physiology and what it's doing.
Yeah, that interpretation factor that you mentioned, the difference between, the information coming in and the communication. Hi, Cassandra. Hi, Nikki. That's coming into your nervous system. I like to think of it as, we have all of these, we've got these very complex brains and we think about things in all these different nuanced ways. But when you think about it, your body speaks a very ancient language, like that telephone game. Like we're having all of these complex thoughts. But honestly, at the end of the day, the way the nervous system works, the way the nervous system responds is if you go over the threshold, the button gets pressed. It's binary. It's, are we safe? Are we in danger? That's it. And so if that negative shock get you to the point where you are overwhelmed, where you cannot handle, you cannot compute the enormity of the information that's coming into you. The shock is so great, the emotional upheaval of it is just so great, the button is pressed. That's basically how it works. Which button gets pressed depends on the content that you are perceiving. How exactly are you relating to this financial loss? What does it mean to you as a being to lose your financial well-being? What does that mean is going to be very unique and individual for each person. Because notice that even though we establish, this article shows us it's a 50% increase in mortality, that does leave another 50% that lose all that money but don't die. So that's where...
Well, no, it's the chances of any one individual. It's not half of the people necessarily.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so what you're saying there is that it's not a...
an absolute, every
right.
single person that loses that amount of money is going to, is going to be, is necessarily going to, because that's how when we read articles though, and when we read percentages, we apply it to ourselves and say, oh, if I lost that much, I'd have, double the chances of dying, or I'd be 50% more likely to die. We take that as that's the take-home message. Mm-hmm. But the thing to remember, and that's the thing about, we did a podcast recently about how nothing happens to everyone, and why, these outliers and things that, someone can lose all that money and not die, or not have an increased risk of dying. Why? Because of them as an individual. The thing about GNM is that it's so individually focused. It has everything to do, not with external circumstances, not with outright, losing a child, losing large amounts of money, some kind of terrible disaster, something horrible happens to you, and that means you will get ... It's not one-to-one like that. It's every single person has their own unique experience of it. They may have suffered the shock, recognized it immediately, emotionally resolved it, did what needed to be done to downgrade the emotional intensity, which downgrades the body's response, which makes it not a big deal, because we're having conflict shocks all of the time. It's just the nature of being out in the world, being a vulnerable being that can be injured, can have things taken away, can lose things, can, be attacked. All of this stuff can happen to us. So in a sense, we're always subject, vulnerable to having conflict shocks all of the time.
It's sort of like, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but like if you drop your telephone or you drop a liquid sensitive thing into the sink, or perhaps even more unfortunately into the toilet, right? It's almost like if you can, and lightning fast it out of there, it's almost like you can get it before
the damage is done. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, or like if you think about like in an office building or something like that, if the lever gets pulled that starts the sprinklers going, water is going to come out. Like the lever has been pulled. The adaptation, the building's adaptation, to the lever being pulled occurs. But it matters if it goes on for 1 second versus 5 minutes versus 24 hours versus a month of the sprinklers going on. The amount of damage to the contents of the building, the amount of damage to the building itself, the amount of changes physically that happen matters an awful lot, right? Depending upon how long the thing is active. And so, I don't know about computers and stuff like that, but I bet if you could literally turn on a sprinkler system in an office building for literally 1 second and turn it off, I bet that the majority of the equipment in that room would probably survive, or it's possible. And I think that that's the way it works with the conflict shock. But it's that ongoing thing, or the non-resolution of it. People have the equivalent of like the sprinkler systems on and on and on and on and on, because they keep recreating those experiences. And I think one of the things that was so interesting. So let's say that this is relevant to anyone, whether you had a financial loss or not, because this is really just illustrating, I think, the primacy of experience, how important your experience is, and how important your ability to kind of monitor what the quality of what it's like to be you is, how you're experiencing the stuff that's going on, and then to become more and more aware of the various things that kind of determine what the quality of that experience is, things that you're doing in your mind, both consciously and other than consciously, because knowing about those things is being able to turn that sprinkler system off. It's downgrading, eliminating that conflict. And it's also kind of setting yourself up. And this is something that's really interesting to me in terms of antifragility. It's setting yourself up so that when you come into contact with things that would have been conflict initiators in the past, it enters into a different kind of what I call like an experiential ecology. So the beliefs that you have, your self-image, your just kind of like resting emotional state, your kind of the suppleness of your experience's ability to absorb a blow or respond to a blow or kind of like move around some kind of an experiential shock. All of that stuff has a tremendous impact upon your ability really to kind of like manage your experience, manage your biological response to this stuff. And so, for example, someone loses a lot of money. Let's go back to that example. You rattled off a whole lot of things. What did you say? Self-devaluation was one, right? So let's say that there's a person out there whose whole personal image, for whatever reason, their whole sense of self is revolves around money and their ability to make money, perhaps their ability to have the social status of having a lot of money. Maybe it has nothing to do with money. Maybe their self-image revolves around their ability to care for the people around them, and maybe their understanding or definition of caring for the people around them means giving them anything and everything they want as soon as they want it. When that person loses 75% of their wealth, like in this study, perhaps they are not able to do that. Or perhaps they just worry about the inability to do that, and then they begin a self-devaluation conflict, right? Mm-hmm. Which will be one set of symptoms. It'll be one manifestation of illness. It'll be one disease versus another. On the other hand, maybe that person loses 75% of their money, and experientially, the significance of that is a death fright conflict, because let's say that when this person was growing up, they saw a friend or a close family member die as a result of, at least in their mind, an inability to access quality medical care. If only our father had had enough, if only we'd had enough money for him to get the best treatment, he still would be here. So in that person's mind, money really, and this is a largely probably an unconscious thing, right? It's not that they think that, most of what is informing our experience is not necessarily stuff that is rational, right? It's pre-rational. So much of what we call rational thought is actually a part of our brain that makes sense out of and explains to ourselves and other people the emotions that we're having. So there's a lot of irrational emotion that we experience, and then our conscious mind or our rational mind pretty much explains what we're doing due to or based upon those emotional motives. And so this person, for them, money and the subject of money, it's not about personal self-worth. It's literally about survival. It's about having the resources necessary to stay alive, because when they were young, they saw in their mind someone die because they did not have access to resources and to money. So that person, they lose the money, they say, oh shit, I'm going to die. Or I may not be able to stay alive. That's a totally different set of symptoms, totally different disease process, right? But, all-cause mortality, that's the interesting thing about the study. Let's see, somebody else. Did we talk about any other ones? I can't think of any.
A territorial loss conflict affecting the coronary arteries.
Okay, so another person loses the same amount of money or the same percentage of money. They experience it as kind of a territorial thing. Perhaps they are in competition with somebody else. Maybe that person's wealth increased, or maybe that person's wealth stayed static, or perhaps they have to sell things to that person, or perhaps they just have to sell things to someone, right? And so they experience the selling off not as self-devaluation, not as a death fright, but as basically a territorial loss. Different set of symptoms. Different. Now, see, the interesting thing about this is that this scenario applies to everything: the death of a spouse, infidelity, loss of a child, or a child, behaving in some way you don't want them to, being treated or mistreated by someone that you work with, being ignored, being snubbed. Whatever is going on in your life, it doesn't matter what it is. The point, I think, is the primacy of your experience. It's your subjective experience matters so much because your body isn't responding to what is true. Your body isn't responding to what a reasonable person would feel. Your body isn't responding to what they intended for you to feel or what they were feeling. Your body's responding to what you're feeling. Your body's responding kind of to what your perception is, to what your experience is. And I think really recognizing the value of your experience as a diagnostic tool for what's going on with you is such an important thing. And it's not about holding your experience up to what you think it should be or what you want it to be. It's a willingness kind of to become aware of exactly what your experience is. And don't worry about your ability or inability to justify the fact that your experience is what it is. Well, I know I shouldn't feel that way, or, and you almost, it's like you were talking about that preconscious stuff where you don't want to acknowledge it to yourself because you don't feel like it, you have a right to feel that way. I was told that when I was growing up. You don't have any right to feel that way. And there was such emotional rebellion in me at that. It was that this person was intruding into my psyche, and telling me those things. So I think a willingness just to observe how we can work with your experience. We can work with any feeling that you're having. But in order to do that, you have to allow yourself to become aware of what that experience is. We call it unconditionally aware. If I am feeling something that's not rational, welcome to the club. Most of us do that most of the time. But if I'm able to acknowledge that to myself, I can respond to that resourcefully. I can respond to that in a way that improves what it's like to be me. I think that's a hard sell for a lot of people. I think it's really difficult to get people to appreciate how important their experience is. And a lot of times, I've watched this happen so many times. I've watched it happen in myself, and I've seen it kind of in other people too. As soon as we convince you that your experience is really important, you immediately begin to kind of beat yourself up about, or worry about, or fret over the fact that your experience isn't better than it is. And the key skill here is when you recognize, well, hang on a second, what effect is worrying about, feeling guilty about, or fretting over my experience? What effect is that activity having on the quality of my experience? It's not improving my experience. It's making it worse. It's perpetuating those elements of my experience that I don't like. So I'm not going to do it anymore. That's that ability, is to keep up with your latest kind of response to that stuff. To one, become aware of what your experience is. And then two, give yourself kind of the flexibility to respond resourcefully to that experience in a way that improves it. Because if you're having a negative experience and then you condemn that or you resist that, The question is, what effect does condemning and resisting have on the quality of your experience? Okay, so now that you were having a negative experience and you condemned and resisted and felt guilty about it, what's the quality of your experience now? And now, and now, and now. And eventually what happens is that you start saying, okay, well, that doesn't work, so I'm going to do something different. Okay, well, I tried accepting it, and that was a little bit, but at least it didn't get any worse. Okay, well, then I tried actually assigning a new meaning or making a new meaning to it. Then I did some beliefs work. I did this, that, the other thing. And then you start noticing upticks in the quality of your experience. And I think as you build that stuff in, and as you master that skill at a really unconscious level, this is the anti-fragility thing. What happens is, having a conflict is a really wonderful thing because it affords you the opportunity to prepare yourself to not have that or similar conflicts in the future. Can't prepare you to not have any conflicts in the future, really. And so it's kind of like one of those things, like if a small misfortune befalls you, and it provides you with an opportunity to avoid greater misfortunes into the future, then it's kind of hard to think of that thing really as a misfortune any longer. You know, all of a sudden we have a new and improved quality of experience of whatever it was that happened, and you've prepared yourself now to be really kind of like a sort of judo in life experience, so that things just come and you just sort of, you know, experientially, you just take the momentum of the happenings, of the goings on, and you at least get it kind of going away from you. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like if you can move out of the way of life, it seems like sometimes it's trying to steamroll you over. It's not a big deal as long as you just know how to step to the side.
Yeah, that's so huge. And like you said, Lucina, your body is responding to your own perspectives, your own emotions. It's knowing yourself in order to protect yourself. And it's really this self-understanding and self-knowledge, which was so profound for us because that's what we were teaching people before I learned about GNM, was the power of knowing yourself, of knowing your own experience, of knowing where your emotions come from. Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? I used to experience emotions as something that just happened to me. I just feel blank. I just feel worried. I just feel anxious. And I wasn't aware of exactly what was causing that emotion to manifest within me. But when you start to slow down your experience and you start to understand the nuance of your perception and how you create your unique perception of the world, you learn so much about yourself. And then you add in symptoms, sicknesses that you've had in the past. It really helps you understand how your body has been interpreting your situation. So whether you've had chronic digestive issues, that tells us that you've had a chronic indigestible morsel conflict where you've been resisting something in your life, something that you refuse to accept, someone that you refuse to accept, a situation, a person, something about yourself that you cannot break down, you cannot process it. And that manifests as digestive problems. And so that's, your body literally, what it's doing is it's helping you to process by increasing digestive juices, by causing tumors in your digestive system. And the tumor, the reason it's there is to produce more digestive juices because it wants to help you to break down and digest whatever it is, whatever situation is troubling you.
Isn't it so interesting that we say that's hard to swallow? Mm-hmm. Isn't it? Something about language kind of really conveys that there's an understanding of a connection between our experience and our physical body. That's a tough pill to swallow, or what are some other ones? I can't stomach that, or that's a tough. Mm-hmm. These are. Why particularly? Why would we speak in that kind of metaphorical? If we are given to metaphorical descriptions of our experience and we use our body as a metaphor, why is that? You know what I'm saying? It's the brain or it's the prefrontal cortex or whatever, but that's a part of the rest of the brain too. There's a relationship there, there's a connection there, and I think it's just so interesting that it seems to suggest that there is a connection between those things. And I think something for me that's so huge about this too is that you were an organism before you were a human being. Do you know what I'm saying? Essentially what we are is a tube. A wiggly tube. Do you know what I mean? Like the alimentary canal, the opening at the top that takes things in, the opening at the bottom that expels things out. Like, think about like an earthworm. We are essentially a very elaborate earthworm, and in some sense, right? So we've got that tube, but we've got all this cool stuff on the outside of it. Do you know what I'm saying? We've got like arms and legs, and we've got a skeleton, and we can move around, and we can type on a computer, and we can fight wars and do art and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, what's the basic reality of what we do? We put things in one end and we expel things out the other. That's basically what we take things in and we expel things out. And when you understand that is it's not the essential element of who you are necessarily, but it was the first thing, first and foremost. What do you and your dog and your cat and a snake and an earthworm and a housefly, all these things have in common? An opening, metabolism in between those things. And so when you recognize that that is literally the core, I mean, it's the core really of who you are, and that everything else has grown out from that. Everything else has layered on top of that. Everything else has developed. Your capacity for speech, your capacity for experience, your capacity to experience yourself, that sense of self, that I, the fact that there's something that it's like to be you. That's a biological manifestation, which is to say that there are elements of your physical apparatus or your body that support or act as a conduit for your sense of self. And when you recognize that, I think you begin to say, okay, so if the tube developed the ability to experience itself as I, here's a tube here, and it thinks it's Steve, do you know what I'm saying? Or it develops the ability to have this appendage called an ego. It's a psychic appendage rather than a physical one. My experience has to, in some way or another, relate back to that tube and that tube's basic process, which is wiggling around, putting things in one end so it can expel it out the other, and surviving so that it can keep on wiggling around and putting things in one end and coming out the other. And then I think it begins to be so intuitively obvious that my experience must relate back to, in some way, my physical body, so that if I, Steve, the guy who's here before you, not the tube, but the me, the ego, if I am really upset about something that's going on in my life, and if I find it hard to swallow, that there's a level of my existence as an organism that literally thinks that this is something that's hard to swallow, because I started off existence sort of genealogically speaking as an organism. Like, literally my only problem was finding things to swallow, being able to swallow them, being able to break them down and expel them. And now, hundreds of millions of years later, I'm very fancy, and I wear clothes, and I have complex relationships, and I interact with computers and all this different stuff. And so I don't really think of myself much as a tube anymore, because I think of myself as a man, and as a chiropractor, and as a coach, and as a blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, though, everything that happens at the level of the kind of the humanistic level, the what it's like to be me, the normal guy, everyday experience, it's got a corollary down there at the somatic tube level. And I think that's a very interesting thing. And so if you're mulling something over, there's all these really interesting connections between, like, my mind won't settle. Oh, my stomach is upset. I just keep kind of ruminating on something. Well, ruminating, what is that? It's a ruminant animal, like a cow, that holds on to something and keeps it so that it can break down. You know what I'm saying? The problem with that, of course, is that it produces a lot of kind of gaseous stuff. And so, you ever get like fog in your head. I mean, it's very interesting, just like those connections. And the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, the more it starts off seeming weird and tenuous, but then it ends up seeming perfectly obvious and almost intuitive.
Perfectly, yeah, and intuitive, and it just makes, and that's the thing about GNM that's so fascinating, is the third biological law, which is the association, like the connection between our cellular tissue level embryology and evolution. And when all of these tissue types formed and their primary purpose and function, because most people don't realize that when you're an embryo, there are tissues. There are three different fundamental tissue types that go on to differentiate, to make all of your different organs, your cells and tissues. So like the outer skin of your body is a different tissue type than the actual bulk of your liver. That's a different tissue type. They serve different purposes. They evolved at different times in human evolution, and those associations, so like you were talking about the tube association, that was like the most basic life form, were just these tubes. It had one opening, and it had things would come in and out the same opening. And even our brainstem is organized in a manner that reflects that tube opening in the way that it is organized. I mean, it's really fascinating when you get down into the science and you look at the organization of the brain and the different control centers. And so the endodermal tissue, basically the tube function, all of those conflicts have to do with processing a morsel, like you said, something coming in and being able to get get it out? Did you want it? You know, you can have issues with every area of your digestive tract.
So whether it's like the chili hot dog or your boss.
Yeah.
I mean, those are essentially morsels, right?
Yeah, the morsel, you know, and so, and it can be, with our minds, it doesn't even have to be a physical food morsel. It could be a situation, a circumstance, but your body processes it in that ancient way, using its ancient language. The next level is the mesoderm tissue, which is from the cerebellum, and that has to do with protection. And, you know, Dr. Hamer talked about how, like, when creatures went from being primarily water dwelling to dwelling on the land, that's when the mesodermal layer developed, and it's about protection. So it's like your pleura, your pericardium, your dermis skin, and it has to do, the conflict scenarios are feeling attacked or feeling soiled. And so isn't that very interesting? Once you have a skin that can be soiled, you develop an association with a conflict of that same type. The ectodermal skin has to do with separation, has to do with sexual separation type conflicts. The bones themselves have to do, the bones and the lymph and the tissues of the body, the connective tissues, have to do with self-devaluation, which has to do with like your structure, your integrity, value as a person. And so each of these things, it has a correlation biologically, embryologically, evolutionarily.
Which is really interesting, isn't it? Like the skeleton, fundamental. It's like core. I mean, it's like the key apparatus. Do you know what I mean? And so when you think about the feeling, you ever had like the feeling of being devalued or of something happening, and like your conclusion from that: I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not young enough, I'm not old enough, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not persuasive enough, I'm not talented enough, I'm not motivated enough, whatever it was. You remember the feeling of that. You know what I'm saying? And the thing then is that you say, okay, if that had a basically, if the ego or the psyche is feeling this, you know what I'm saying, this is what it's doing, what's the body's version of that? And you know what I'm saying, it's what would it mean, like if you're speaking to ancient tissue in the body, to not be enough, what would that mean? And it would mean insufficiently reinforced, right? It would mean, you know, we need to restructure, we need to overhaul, we need to do, and I think a lot of it too is like wearing away of the skeleton, right? The thing about that is that, like, if I build something, let's say I'm building a building, you know what I'm saying, and I need it to be able to support a certain amount of weight, and then I realize 99% into the project, man, this building isn't strong enough. I can't just go and start gluing stuff to that building. I can't just start laying. If it's fundamental, the flaw, there's tearing down that has to happen. And so I think a lot of times what happens is the body does this tearing down. You know what I'm saying? The thing is, then the problem so much of this arises is that I think our ancient tissues really cannot understand why we would be worried about something as ephemeral as what our boss thinks of us, or whether or not that girl wants to go out on a date with us, or whether she thinks it's stupid that we even asked. Like, literally, we've got tissues that are still operating in a world, in a literal physical world, in which the only thing you have to worry about is finding stuff to put in one tube and expel out the other end of the tube, or the ability to procreate. Like, and you know, it doesn't have the capacity to experience the kind of nuanced emotion that really we associate with being human beings. I mean, I think that's the thing, and so therefore, it's like we have this incredibly sensitive neurological apparatus. It's a wonderful thing. It's the ability for us to experience, to have what it's like to be us, to be conscious creatures, and so that's cool. But the thing is, when you've got a highly sensitive system, a very powerful system, you have to know how to direct it. You have to understand how to relate to it. We haven't learned how to really thrive as human beings yet. I mean, it's in terms of evolutionary history, we've only very recently developed the ability to experience consciousness of what it's like to be us. And at this point, we have such a sublime and a sensitive system, neurologically speaking, that we are literally overloading our body. We're top heavy. Our brains have grown really, really fast, a lot, really, really fast, and we haven't figured out quite how to operate that yet. This is the thing I think of it as like we are the artificial intelligence, which is very interesting. So, you know, there's really just the tube, and then the tube grew a nervous system, and then the nervous system developed a sense of self because it helped with self-preservation. It helped figure out other people and, you know, surmise things about the environment that were useful for you know, staying alive, putting things in one end and out the other, and making other little tubes to wiggle around and do the same thing. We reached a tipping point, though, And it was a tipping point at which our nervous system stopped being about move away from darkness, moving toward light, moving toward colors, moving towards food, moving towards mates, moving away from people who were hunting us or people who were dangerous or animals or whatever who were dangerous. And it developed the ability to be self-conscious, to be concerned, to function as like a social creature, so that you could get collectives or societies of tubes that could get together and wiggle together and come up with new and interesting ways of making food. So that, you know what I mean, all this different stuff. And we now need to figure out how to use this system. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know, it's like, what if there was like a hearing aid or something that we developed and it gave you the ability to hear things from 3 miles away, and you put this thing in, it could really do you a lot of harm if you don't know how to turn down that sensitivity, if you don't know how to control what's going on. That's what's happening with us right now, is we got the capacity to worry about shit that's not real. And we have the capacity to think about things in a way that does not serve us, you know. And all that means is that we have a capacity to think about things in a lot of different ways, and that's really wonderful. But when you have that power, you know, being powerful necessarily means it matters what you do. And when it matters what you do, there are certain things that you can do that will serve you less than others. And that's just the position that everyone's in. And we have not yet kind of crafted a systematic approach to handling this tremendous power that we have. And this is like one of my things, is that if you're feeling disempowered or if you're feeling like a victim, that is what it feels like to misdirect or misappropriate your power, because you have the power to create an experience. Otherwise, you have no problems. You know what I'm saying? Because if there's not something that it's like, if there's something that it's like to be you, you're creating it, you're giving rise to it. And if what it's like to be you consists of kind of victimhood and disempowerment, all that means is that you can create an experience. Congratulations. Now we just need to point it in a different direction and create a better one. And your life will be wonderful. And oh, by the way, your body will start to respond to that, and things will be great in that area too. But it's really kind of coming into your own as this powerful intelligence that you are, and figuring out that, like, you're the creative epicenter. Do you know what I'm saying? And so getting to that point where I had a thought earlier today where it's like, everyone, the basic problem is that we are willing to think things that don't serve us. And then we say, oh gosh, but you know, I know it's not serving me, but what if it's true? But then when we build this technology in, which is like the Ever Better Thought technology, this is what all of our stuff is about. When you get to the point where you say, I'm not going to bother about whether or not it's true, because one, I know that I can create an experience of things being true even if they're not. If I think it enough, and if I believe it enough, and if I practice it enough, I can create an experience of things being true even if it's not. And two, I can make things become true, especially when it comes to what's true about me and like my life and my worth and my value. I can make things become true by thinking them and feeling them and behaving and doing them into reality over a period of time. And so if we're not worried about what's true anymore in terms of thinking and all that stuff, we then start to move towards, well, what effect is this having on the quality and the character of what it's like to be me? That's like the master code. When you crack that thing, when you develop the ability, this is all the stuff that we do, by the way. When you develop the ability to monitor, pay attention to the quality of what it's like to be you, and you become aware of all the little mental things, all the little, I mean, like all the keyboards, like here's like a computer keyboard over here, and it's got all these different buttons on it. And each one of those buttons is like meaning assignment, values, beliefs, sorting strategies, sorting programs, patterns of focusing, habits that I've installed on my computer. When you become aware of all those different buttons that you can push to create different experiences of what it's like to be you, and it's like keyboarding, you got to figure out how to hit them. It's like, the meaning assignment button, that's way over there, and I'm supposed to reach over with my ring finger. It doesn't have the dexterity. Mentally, you have to develop the coordination and the endurance and the flexibility and the strength to depress those keys and to figure out when to push them down and how to push them down and in what order. Once you do that, you can really consciously create an experience of what it's like to be you that's wonderful. And think about what the biological consequences of that are. How does the body respond to elation, to well-being, to empowerment, to valuing yourself, to not fearing death? I mean, to getting a relationship.
Or financial loss.
or financial loss, when you are at that point where you literally, nothing perturbs you. You know what I'm saying? You don't, not because you're ignoring those things or because you pretend like they don't exist, but because you know that your job is just to respond resourcefully to what's true. It's not to resist what's true or to wish that what's true were different or to decide that the fact that what's true is true means bad things about you. It's just get in it, get with it, start flowing, start going, respond resourcefully to what's true and focus your mind on what you want and all this different stuff. That's a powerful communication to your body. And it's like, as a bonus, everything starts working out for you in your life too. Because that's the thing I love about this, because like in old medicine, you went to the doctor and you were about to die, and if you were lucky, you didn't die. You know what I'm saying? But then you went back to your life and it was just the same old crap. But with this, it's like surviving and thriving sort of becomes one master project. It's one thing. And you go, like, we call it remedial changes, which is like, I've got this illness, now it's gone, but I still don't have any money, my relationships aren't any good, I still have a poor self-image, all this different stuff. And it's like, now we make remedial changes, which is basically curing your symptoms, and generative changes, which is like, okay, what are you going to do now instead? Okay, what are you going to do with your life now? You make those one thing. All of a sudden, the power that you have is tremendously increased, and you accomplish, when you recognize that both of those things are one project, you accomplish both of those things much more effectively, because one requires the other. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, in order to heal, you need to thrive. And in order to thrive, obviously, you need to heal, you need to survive. And I think the recognition of that's a pretty cool thing.
Well, that's super interesting, too, because when you realize that health no longer is health about doing a bunch of stuff you hate. That's the thing, is most people think that I don't have time to be healthy, but it's such an interesting paradox, because you think that in order to be healthy, you have to do a bunch of stuff that you don't like to do. You've got to eat this food, you've got to go to the gym, you can't do the things you like to do, like drink and, eat sugar. And so all along, it's like you experience yourself as an unhealthy person. And you may even acknowledge to yourself, I'm just not willing to do that. I'm not willing to give these things up. But if in the back of your mind you have this feeling every time you smoke, oh, I'm killing myself. I'm killing myself. It's not.
Should. It's kind of a nagging tension.
I'm doing something that, like, I don't value health that much. I know that I could get sick, but I don't feel compelled to do it. It's like you feel bad either way, because if you gave all that stuff up, you would feel bad. If you gave up all that stuff, and a lot of people do. A lot of people go down the path of healing their condition, and they're choking back all sorts of supplements, and they're taking all this green juice, and they're missing all of their food, and they're just miserable with all of their treatments that they're doing, but they're doing all of the right stuff. And so that's where it gets tricky about the people that says, oh, well, they did all holistic care, and they, their family said, oh no, don't do chemo, don't do surgery, do all the holistic stuff. They did all the holistic stuff, but they hated it, and they had a terrible experience.
And that's so easy to overlook. What's so easy to overlook? It's so easy to overlook the quality of that person's experience. That's like with the guy that we know, remember, at the seminars and stuff like that. Amazing man, hugely supportive, hugely inspirational, and all this stuff. I don't know what his experience was. I don't know what it was like to be him speaking to us. You know what I'm saying? And it seemed like, I don't even know. If I was just speculate, it was that there wasn't a lot. He didn't pay a lot of attention to what it was like to be him, because he was all about other people. And I think that's such an important thing. Is it like, stop. What's it like to be you right now? And it doesn't matter what the answer to that question is. It does matter that you know what the answer to that question is, or that you're aware of what the answer to that question is. That's such a hugely powerful thing. And it's not that, like, doing holistic stuff, if you don't like it, it's like your experience of doing whatever it is that you're doing is occurring as a result of a lot of things that you're doing inside your head. Like, you're thinking in terms of necessity, or in terms of obligation, or in terms of, this means I gotta do this forever, or whatever. And again, it's not like there's certain behaviors and then there's certain experiences that must go along with those behaviors. Drinking green smoothies, misery. It's that there's a behavior, and then there's a feeling that motivates that behavior, and then there's a thought that gives rise to that behavior. And I was thinking about this the other day, that like guilt, shame, blame, obligation, sort of begrudging compliance, those are fuels, right? That will drive a behavior, but they're not really efficient fuels, and they're not really renewable fuels. They're not really sustainable fuels, And so you can nag yourself, or you can say, I'm going to die if I don't do this, so here I go, or I owe it to my kids, or I owe it to my spouse, or whatever. You can use that to kind of get blood out of a turnip and to force behaviors that you think you need to do. But it's not the most efficient way to do it. You know what I'm saying? There are always these more efficient ways of going about doing things, and it's finding those ways. And it's about really, when you value the quality of what it's like to be you, when you practice thinking about just the idea of what it's like to be you, and you invest in that, and you learn how to finesse that experience, you learn how to enrich that experience. That experience is like it's like a brimming cup. It begins to spill over, and it spills over into effortlessly resourceful behaviors. You don't know how good life can be until you eat a salad and enjoy it. and really enjoy it. Like actually you're doing the stuff you want to do, and you want to do it, and you want to do the things that you want to do, and all of it is coming together in a way that improves what it's like to be you. That's like engineering the experience, and it's such a cool thing, and that's what the thought technology is all about. It's about, listen, you can construct the stuff any way you want to. It's just about getting a feel for it, though. Literally getting a feel for it, figuring out how to aim this amazing neurological apparatus that's your brain, that's your mind, and then getting good at, operating it.
Yeah, that's why my coaching with people is so different. Because people are so used to saying, "Tell me what to do, doc. Tell me what to do. Tell me the list of things to do." But it's like what you do. It doesn't matter as much as how you feel about what you do. How are you feeling about the things that you're doing? How do you feel about taking all those supplements? Does it, do you feel like you're choking these things down and you absolutely hate it? Because a lot of people I know, they develop different type of symptoms, like their throat's sore because they are swallowing things that they don't want to swallow. And so it's just such an important thing to remember. At the end of the day, it's all about your experience. That is the absolute in GNM. It's like the individual, unique perception and experience. Hold on. Random side note. I have to mention this in this video because we're going to share this to YouTube. And every time I post something to YouTube where you even mention evolution, like people ignore the content of the presentation or whatever it is we're talking about, and they say, they start railing against evolution. And I'm not here to convince you of anything regarding evolution. The biological connections and correlations make sense in that paradigm of understanding how our tissues came to be the way that they are now. But please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and ignore all of the really useful stuff that we talk about on my channel, because you have a problem with evolution, so I don't know.
Well, and that's a problem with information processing from my perspective, is that when I watch a video, doesn't matter who it is. Sometimes when I listen to myself, I just separate the wheat from the chaff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What is useful to me right here, right now? What can I? And if there's things in something that someone is saying that I'm not willing to believe or that I'm not willing to entertain, how precisely am I able to excise that which is of benefit to me from that which I am not at this moment willing or prepared or able to assimilate? You know what I mean? And I think that ability is such a useful thing, because then I don't have to send them an email saying, "I liked your presentation, but you're wrong about this, and here's 18 videos," and blah. I'm not obligated to kind of vomit all of that ideological chaff at them and say, "I liked your stuff, but you're wrong about this." I can literally just say, "That part's for me right now, that part's not for me right now." That's fine. That's okay. That's literally like when we put this stuff out here, I think of it like this. It's like we're having a dinner party. It's an information, experiential dinner party here. And I've invited you to come. Now, I haven't invited you to come so that I can force every dish into your mouth, and so that force you to eat all of it. You know what I'm saying? It was just kind of a spread. It's like a buffet, but it's like a classy buffet, hopefully. And you just kind of go from place to place, and you kind of take the things that you want. And that's really like when I'm interacting with people, it's partially selfish, because it is such a pleasure to interact with people who are in that place where they kind of take the things that appeal to them and leave the things that don't. But it's really about improving your experience. It's about, listen, can I come into contact with information that is potentially useful to me? There's also some stuff there that's either just not right for me, it's just not right, period. It's just not right for me right now. It's just not something that I want to deal with right now. Can I reach over and take a little bit of what I want and leave the stuff that I don't? And without feeling like I absolutely have to object to the fact that it's there. You know what I mean? That's a freeing thing. And it's not something that I think that you should do or that anyone should do. It's something that I have found to be immensely liberating in my own personal experience. Because I used to be the person who had to say...
Oh, me too.
I mean, it's like 90% of it was life-changing, wonderful. 10% of it was slightly different than what I would have done. And experientially, the most salient, the most relevant part was that 10%. And I literally had no choice at that time but to share my disagreement. Now I have a choice, and now I exercise that choice consciously, when I do anyway. It's absolutely, it is ecstasy. It truly is information processing ecstasy. It's pretty nerdy sounding, but it really is. It's really fine. Nerdy. It's fine. I'm okay. You're okay. That works for me. That doesn't work for me. I literally don't have to inform the host about every bite of the food that I take and every bite that I choose not to take. It's cool. It's fine. You just take it and use it. You know what I mean? And when you can do that, it's just like, you know, it's fun.
Yeah, and it's another way to feel good. It's another way to not feel like you know what I mean? Because that's a negative feeling. I used to really feel like the burden to have to right all the wrongs in the world and to tell all the people the things that I thought were wrong, or the nuance, the thing that I needed to add to it. But it wasn't a good feeling. It was a I gotta right these wrongs.
It's a herding cats kind of thing. Isn't
it? And it was a negative feeling, and I would say that there was probably definitely some type of correlation physically to really feeling like you had to do that all the time. So I just want to put that out there that, if you feel compelled, if that kind of bubbles up in you as like something that makes you angry, something that makes you, not listen to, the science of GNM and, all of the wonderful things that Dr. Hamer discovered about the connections of the body, just watch that, and that's really what our approach is all about, is observing yourself, observing your experience, observe where that's coming from, and kind of pause and reflect, because this is all about self-knowledge, self-understanding, knowing yourself, knowing what makes you, what makes you tick, what puts you over your threshold for what you can handle, before you need to, freak out or say something, or, have a,
hijack the conversation sort of.
Well, yeah, potentially. But really, it's about how you're feeling, and yeah, so just paying attention to that. And I just think that this, this article that you came across today is just such a profound explanation of how this operates in our day-to-day, how financial disaster, any kind of shocking something that happens to you affects you on a biological level, depending on you. It's not that it's a one-to-one, that it absolutely has to happen. Everybody that loses this happens to. It's never that way. It's never 100%, because every individual is so unique in their perspective. Everything that's happened to them is so unique. There's no way, and that's why, there's no studies of things that are 100% of anything. It's always some percentage of this amount of people, this thing happens to. It's because they tend to see the world in a more similar way. But even similar isn't the same. Everyone's unique experience has to do with all the stuff that was going on the day that they had their conflict shock. And so just paying attention to your own experience it's such a powerful thing. And so, if you're interested in learning more about our approach and what we do, please send me an email or a message, connect with me somehow through the internet. We're coming out with a really, really cool thing very soon to help people process these conflicts. Like, what do you do? And that's like a lot of people like, well, what do you do once you have this conflict, once you realize it's a thing, but it's like, now that I know about it, it's still there. I don't know how to get rid of it. And our approach is amazing for that. And we have a whole 10 module online course that will show you exactly how to figure out how to take apart these conflicts.
It's actually a wonderful course too, by the way.
Oh, it's amazing.
Everyone has a course now, but this is like a true.
It's a
It's outstanding.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's because we put everything that we have into making this thing, and we made it with you in mind. That was one of the big things for me too. It was like, I want to equip a person with everything they need, nothing that they don't, and really just everyone who goes through this course relates the same thing in a different way. There's these shifts in your experience, and also in your experience of your experience, where you by degrees, oh, I consciously shifted my feeling here. Oh, I deliberately changed the way I was thinking about that. Oh, I responded to this thing differently than I did before. And each one of those things is wonderful and produces good results. But then there's this threshold that you hit where you put it all together and you take all those individual examples and you extrapolate up to the big picture and you make a new conclusion. And that new conclusion is, oh, it's an experience. It says everything about what it's like to be me is coming from me. Oh, so that means I can always create any experience I want. So I guess that means I don't really need to worry. I guess that means I don't need to devalue myself. I guess that means, if I'm feeling unworthy, well, that's a feeling, and I know how our feelings come from, and I know what to do about it. If I actually am not as good at something as I would like to be, well, I know how to get better at that thing. So let me just go and you become a free and an autonomous and a spontaneous and a powerful person. And it's just such a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so it's a health course, it's a beyond course, it's a survival course, it's a thriving course. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's you learning about yourself. That's really the thing I got from doing the course and continuing to do the course in my daily life is knowing myself, understanding where my perceptions come from, where do my feelings come from, what makes me who I am. And so I love it. But we're taking the principles from that course and condensing it into more bite-size, very content-specific situations to help people overcome conflicts. And so I'll keep you posted about that. It's going to be amazing. One of a kind, nothing else like it. So specifically from the GNM approach, how to overcome very specific conflicts, because like we said, there's so many different conflicts and so many facets to one category of conflicts, that there's a lot to dig into, and your unique experience is your unique experience. And so you need to figure out what it's made of. What are the individual parts and pieces and components that's keeping this conflict active in your life? Because until you resolve the conflict, again, it's the sprinkler system in the office building. If you just keep pressing it every now and then because you don't know what causes you to press those buttons, you're surprised every time you're devaluing yourself again, it's causing there are physical ramifications. There are adaptations that take place because that's just how your body is programmed. It's that binary. It's, oh, we're over the threshold, buttons pressed, we're back into the conflict once again. And so it's, how do we stop those programs? How do we become aware of all of their parts and pieces, the components that trigger conflicts? You can take those things apart, and that's what we'll show you how to do in that very specific each conflict. And so it's gonna be really cool. So if you are interested in it, you can send me a message so I make sure to let you know as soon as it's released. So good stuff. Thank you guys for watching. Please share this video if it was helpful for you. I mean, this stuff is absolutely life-changing, and so few people are teaching it. So the more people that we can reach with this information, the better. And so we'd love your help in doing that. And send us a message if you need anything at all. And have a great night.
Thank you.